That night was supposed to be like any other. A quiet evening at home with Ethan, dinner dishes still drying on the counter, and the faint hum of the TV in the background. But everything changed with a knock at the door. It wasn't a hurried knock, or an aggressive one, just a calm, deliberate tap that seemed to echo louder than it should have. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I hesitated. My heart raced. As I approached the door, a strange sense of anticipation settling over me. When I opened it, there he was, Mr. Collins, Ethan's teacher, standing on my porch under the dim glow of the porch light. "I hope I'm not interrupting, hinatend ista atwaken," he said, his voice steady but softer than usual. He held a folder in his hand, and while his words were casual, his eyes told a different story. There was something behind them, something I couldn't quite place, but it made my breath hitch. At that moment, I knew this wasn't going to be just another ordinary night. Whatever brought him here, it was about to unravel something I wasn't prepared for. Ever since my divorce 6 months ago, life had been anything but easy. The house felt quieter than it ever had before, the kind of quiet that seeps into your bones and makes you feel small. My days were a blur of work and chores, but the nights were the hardest. That's when the loneliness hit the hardest, when the shadows stretched across the walls and the silence wrapped around me like an unwelcome guest. I told myself I was holding it together for Ethan, my 12-year-old son, but there were nights when I would sit at the edge of my bed and wonder if I was failing him. Ethan was my bright spot in an otherwise gray world. He was smart, curious, and had this way of finding joy in the smallest things. I saw him trying to adjust to the changes in our lives, his father moving out, the long stretches of time when it was just the two of us. But it wasn't easy. He'd started spending more time alone in his room, but every now and then, he'd come running to me with a story about school or a joke his teacher, Mr. Collins, had told. Mr. Collins was someone Ethan talked about constantly. He wasn't just a teacher. He was a figure of stability for Ethan, someone who made the classroom feel like a second home. Ethan would tell me how Mr. Collins always took the time to make each student feel important, how he stayed late after school to help with projects or listen when someone had a problem. It was clear he was more than just a teacher to Ethan. He was a role model. I'd only met Mr. Collins a few times during parent-teacher conferences and school events, but he left an impression. He was calm and approachable, the kind of person who made you feel at ease even in the most awkward situations. He had a way of speaking that made you believe he genuinely cared about what you were saying, something I hadn't felt from anyone in a long time. Despite the challenges, Ethan's enthusiasm for school and Mr. Collins's influence had been a lifeline for both of us. I found myself looking forward to the stories Ethan would share, the little glimpses of his day that reminded me we were still finding moments of happiness in the chaos. But there were also moments that made me feel inadequate, like the time Ethan asked for my help with a science project, only to tell me, "It's okay, Mom." Mr. Collins explained it better. I laughed it off, but inside it stung. One evening, as we were clearing up after dinner, Ethan mentioned that Mr. Collins had suggested a home visit to help with a group project. He said it might be easier if he could meet with us at home. Ethan explained, his eyes lighting up at the idea. At first I hesitated. It felt a little unusual, but the way Ethan looked at me, so hopeful, I couldn't say no. I told him we'd make it work, not realizing that decision would set off a chain of events that would change everything. In the days leading up to the visit, I found myself thinking about Mr. Collins more often than I cared to admit. I wondered if he would notice how hard I was trying to hold everything together, if he would see past the smiles I wore like armor. There was something about him that felt safe, comforting in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I shook the thoughts away, telling myself it was just admiration, nothing more. But a small part of me couldn't help but wonder, what if? The evening of Mr. Collins's visit arrived sooner than I expected. I'd spent the day cleaning the house more thoroughly than usual, trying to make everything look presentable. Ethan was excited, chattering nonstop about how helpful Mr. Collins was going to be with their project. I smiled and nodded, but inside I felt a nervous flutter I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just about having a guest over. It was about him, Mr. Collins. When he arrived, Ethan rushed to the door to greet him. Mr. Collins stood there in a crisp button-up shirt and dark jeans, carrying a bag of materials for the project. His smile was warm, the kind that instantly put you at ease. "Thank you for having me over," he said, his voice calm and polite. As he stepped inside, his eyes briefly met mine, and for a split second I felt an unspoken connection, though I quickly brushed it off. The evening started innocently enough. Mr. Collins and Ethan spread their materials across the dining table, diving into the project with enthusiasm. I offered snacks and drinks, keeping myself busy in the kitchen but occasionally glancing over to see how they were doing. Every now and then Mr. Collins would glance my way, offering a polite smile or a quick thank you. As the evening wore on, Ethan grew tired and eventually excused himself to get ready for bed. "I'll be back in a minute," he said, leaving me alone with Mr. Collins. The air in the room shifted slightly, the silence between us heavier than I expected. "You have a wonderful son," he said, breaking the silence. He looked up from the project materials, his expression soft but earnest. "He's bright, curious, and so full of potential. You've done an amazing job raising him." The compliment caught me off guard. I smiled, but it felt shaky. "Thank you. I'm just trying my best. It's not easy, doing this alone." He nodded, his gaze lingering a moment longer than it needed to. "I can only imagine," he said quietly. "But you're stronger than you think. It shows in how much Ethan looks up to you." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. His words felt genuine, more personal than I was used to hearing. I tried to focus on the conversation, but I couldn't ignore the warmth in his voice or the way his eyes seemed to search mine for something unspoken. As the evening continued, our conversation grew deeper, more personal. He shared stories about his own struggles, how teaching had become his way of giving back after a difficult childhood. "Sometimes I feel like I understand my students more than anyone else does, Ga," he admitted, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "But it's also hard, feeling like I have to be perfect all the time." I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to admit. "It's exhausting, isn't it? Pretending you have it all together when deep down you're just trying to get through the day." He looked at me then, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Sympathy, understanding, or maybe something deeper. "Exactly," he said softly. "It's rare to find someone who gets it." The conversation felt heavier, the room quieter. I busied myself with clearing the table, trying to shake off the strange pull I felt toward him. But then he stood up, his presence suddenly too close, and I froze. "You don't have to do that," he said, reaching for the plate I was holding. His hand brushed mine, just for a moment, but it was enough to send a shiver up my spine. I looked up, and our eyes met again, this time lingering longer than they should have. It's fine," I stammered, pulling my hand away. My heart raced, and I could feel the tension between us growing thicker. He hesitated, then stepped back, giving me space. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "You didn't," I said quickly, though the words felt like a lie. Because the truth was, I wasn't uncomfortable. I was confused. Confused by the way his presence made me feel, by the way my heart seemed to betray me every time he was near. As he gathered his things to leave, the atmosphere remained charged. At the door, he paused, turning to face me one last time. "If you ever need anything, help with Ethan, or just someone to talk to, I'm here," he said. His words felt loaded, carrying a weight I didn't fully understand. I nodded, managing a weak smile. "Thank you. I'll keep that in mind." When the door closed behind him, I leaned against it, exhaling a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My mind raced with questions I didn't have answers to. What had just happened? And why couldn't I stop thinking about him, about the way he made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years? In the days that followed, I tried to push those thoughts aside, to convince myself it was all in my head. But every time Ethan mentioned Mr. Collins or brought home another story from school, I felt that same flutter of emotion, that same pull I couldn't ignore. It wasn't long before Mr. Collins reached out again, this time under the guise of another school project. He asked if he could stop by to drop off some materials Ethan might need, and though I knew I should say no, I found myself agreeing. When he arrived, the atmosphere between us was different, more familiar, yet somehow more charged. We exchanged pleasantries, but the conversation quickly turned personal again. He spoke about his dreams, his fears, and the parts of himself he rarely shared with anyone. And I listened, drawn to the honesty in his voice, the vulnerability he seemed to trust me with. At one point he looked at me and said, "You're easy to talk to, you know that? It's like you understand things most people don't." I didn't know what to say. His words felt too close, too intimate, and yet I couldn't bring myself to pull away. Instead, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected, sharing pieces of my own story that I usually kept hidden. The conversations grew longer, the silences between us heavier. There were moments when I caught him looking at me, his gaze soft but intense, and I felt my resolve weakening. I told myself it was just admiration, just gratitude for his kindness, but deep down, I knew it was more, and so did he. One evening as he was leaving, he hesitated at the door, his hand resting on the frame. "I should go," he said, his voice strained, but he didn't move. I stood there, unsure of what to say or do. The tension between us was almost unbearable, the air thick with unspoken words. And then he turned back, his eyes searching mine. "I don't know what's happening here," he said quietly, "but I can't stop thinking about you." His words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My breath caught, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process the emotions swirling inside me. But one thing was clear. Nothing about this was simple, and nothing would ever be the same again. The evening was quiet, but the storm inside me had been brewing for weeks. After Mr. Collins' last confession, his words haunted me, playing over and over in my mind. "I can't stop thinking about you." What did he mean? Did he regret saying it? And more importantly, why couldn't I shake the feeling that I didn't want him to take it back? It wasn't long before he found another reason to stop by. This time, Ethan had forgotten a folder at school, and Mr. Collins offered to drop it off. It felt like an excuse, but I didn't question it. When he arrived, Ethan was upstairs finishing homework, leaving us alone in the living room. The air felt heavy, like we both knew something was coming, but neither of us dared to say it out loud. He handed me the folder, his fingers brushing mine for just a moment longer than necessary. I pulled my hand back, clutching the folder like it was a lifeline. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're welcome," he replied, his tone just as soft. His eyes lingered on mine, and I could feel my pulse quicken under his gaze. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was deafening, charged with tension that neither of us seemed willing to break. Finally, he took a step closer, his expression conflicted. "I don't think I can keep pretending," he said, his voice strained. "Pretending what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "That I don't feel this between us," he said, gesturing vaguely to the space between us. "I know it's wrong, but I can't ignore it anymore." His words hit me like a tidal wave, knocking the breath out of me. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. My mind raced, torn between the part of me that wanted to push him away and the part that desperately wanted to pull him closer. "You don't mean that," I finally managed, though my voice was shaky and unconvincing. "I do," he said, his eyes searching mine for something. "Permission, maybe, or understanding. You have no idea how hard I've tried to stop feeling this way. But every time I see you, every time we talk, it's like—" He trailed off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Like what?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Like you're the only one who understands me," he said, his voice breaking. "Like you're the only person who's ever really seen me." His words struck a chord deep inside me, a part of me I thought had long been buried. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I shook my head, trying to make sense of what I was feeling. "This is wrong," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You know it is." "I know," he said, his voice filled with anguish. "But that doesn't change how I feel." He took another step closer, and I felt my back press against the wall. He was too close now, his presence overwhelming. I could feel the heat radiating off him, the weight of his emotions pressing down on me like a physical force. "I can't do this," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Tell me you don't feel it too," he said, his voice pleading. "Tell me, and I'll walk away right now." I opened my mouth to say the words, but they wouldn't come, because the truth was, I did feel it. I felt it in the way my heart raced every time he looked at me, in the way his words made me feel seen and understood, in a way I hadn't felt in years. He reached out, his hand brushing against my cheek. The touch was light, hesitant, as if he was giving me the chance to pull away. But I didn't. Instead, I closed my eyes, letting myself feel the warmth of his hand, the gentleness of his touch. "This can't happen," I said, though my voice was weak and uncertain. "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it already has." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I opened my eyes to find him staring at me, his gaze filled with a mixture of longing and regret. The intensity of it made my breath catch, and for a moment I felt like the world had stopped spinning. Before I could say anything, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was both hesitant and desperate. It was a moment of weakness, a collision of emotions we couldn't hold back any longer. And for a brief, fleeting moment, nothing else mattered. But then reality came crashing back, and I pulled away, my heart pounding in my chest. "This isn't right," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I shouldn't have—" "No," I interrupted, shaking my head. "We both know this can't happen. I have Ethan to think about, and you're his teacher." He nodded, stepping back and running a hand through his hair. "You're right," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I'm sorry. I should go." I watched as he turned and walked to the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. But just before he left, he turned back to look at me one last time. "For what it's worth," he said, his voice trembling, "I've never felt this way about anyone before." And with that, he was gone, leaving me standing there in the silence, my heart heavy with emotions I couldn't begin to untangle. The room felt empty without him, but the weight of what had just happened lingered, a reminder that nothing would ever be the same. The house felt unnaturally quiet after Mr. Collins left, the kind of silence that amplifies every thought, every doubt. I stood by the door for what felt like hours, my hand still on the doorknob, as if turning it would somehow rewind the clock. My heart was still racing, and my mind was a tangled web of emotions I couldn't begin to sort out. What had I done? What had we done? I thought about Ethan upstairs, likely lost in his world of video games or homework, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface of his seemingly ordinary evening. The guilt was suffocating. How could I let this happen? And yet, even through the guilt, there was something else, a flicker of longing that I hated myself for feeling. The days that followed were no easier. Every time Ethan mentioned school or brought up Mr. Collins's name, I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite describe. Part fear, part shame, and part something dangerously close to yearning. I started avoiding eye contact with Ethan, afraid he'd somehow see the truth in my face, but the universe seemed intent on testing me. At school drop-off one morning, I saw Mr. Collins standing by the entrance, chatting with another parent. My pulse quickened, and for a moment, I thought about driving away, but Ethan had already unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door. "See you later, Mom," he called out, oblivious to my inner turmoil. I forced myself to get out of the car, knowing it would look suspicious if I didn't. As I walked Ethan to the entrance, Mr. Collins's eyes met mine, and for a brief second, the rest of the world faded away. His expression was unreadable, part guarded, part conflicted, but his gaze lingered just long enough to make my breath catch. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," he said, his tone polite and professional, but there was an undercurrent of tension that only I could hear. "Good morning," I replied, my voice shakier than I intended. Ethan waved goodbye and ran off to join his friends, leaving me alone with Mr. Collins. I could feel the weight of his presence, the unspoken words hanging in the air between us. I wanted to say something, to address what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I offered a weak smile and walked away, feeling his eyes on my back the entire time. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, I replayed the moment over and over in my mind. Was he regretting what had happened? Did he think I was? And what if Ethan ever found out? The thought was unbearable. I knew I needed to put an end to this, to draw a line that couldn't be crossed again. But the thought of cutting him out of our lives entirely felt like a loss I wasn't ready to face. The tension only grew in the weeks that followed. At every school event, every parent-teacher interaction, the unspoken connection between us lingered just beneath the surface. It was like walking a tightrope, knowing one wrong step could send everything crashing down. Then one evening, a text message appeared on my phone. It was from Mr. Collins. "I know we said we wouldn't, but I can't stop thinking about you. Can we talk?" I stared at the message, my heart pounding. I knew responding would only complicate things further, but the idea of ignoring it felt impossible. My finger hovered over the screen, torn between what I knew was right and what I couldn't seem to let go of. In the end, I typed out a single word: maybe. The message was sent before I could change my mind, and the moment I saw the word appear in the chat, I felt a mix of panic and relief. What had I just set in motion? As I sat there in the silence of my living room, I realized I was standing at a crossroads. Whatever happened next would shape not only my life but Ethan's as well. And yet, for all the guilt and fear, there was still that flicker of something else, something that refused to be extinguished. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. And as much as I wanted to believe I could control what came next, deep down, I knew better. Some lines once crossed are impossible to uncross. If you've been drawn into this story as much as I have while writing it, don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotionally charged, true-to-life tales. What do you think Sarah should do? Should she cut ties with Mr. Collins? Or is this just the start of something neither of them can resist? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned for more stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.